Most people grow up believing that morality is simple. Some actions are good, others are evil. Some people are virtuous, others are corrupt. We inherit these ideas so early and so quietly that we rarely stop to question where they came from. But what if our deepest moral convictions are not timeless truths? What if they are products of history, psychology, and power? What if the very way we think about truth and goodness hides something about human nature that we prefer not to see? To move beyond good and evil is not to abandon morality or to celebrate chaos. It is to look beneath the surface of our moral beliefs and ask uncomfortable questions. It is to suspect that what we call truth may not be pure and objective, but shaped by our instincts, fears, and desires. The first step in this journey is to doubt the value we place on truth itself. We tend to assume that truth is unquestionably good. We praise honesty, clarity, and reason. We admire philosophers and scientists who claim to pursue knowledge without bias. But pause for a moment. Why do we value truth? Is it because truth makes us better? Or because we have been trained to revere it? Perhaps our desire for certainty and stability drives us to prefer truths that comfort us. Perhaps we cling to certain truths because they protect our sense of order. Philosophers have long claimed to seek objective reality. Yet often, beneath their logical arguments, there are hidden moral commitments. They speak of reason triumphing over passion, of the mind controlling the body, of the eternal conquering the temporary. These ideas are not neutral. They reflect a deep preference for stability over change, for control over instinct. What looks like pure thought is often the expression of a particular temperament. Consider how often we divide the world into opposites: good and evil, true and false, selfless and selfish. We treat these oppositions as fundamental. But are they really so clean? Is something entirely good, or entirely bad? Or are these categories simplifications that help us feel secure? When we label something as evil, we often stop examining it. We condemn it and move on. Yet life is more complex than our labels allow. There is also a hidden assumption behind much moral thinking: the belief in free will as absolute freedom. We imagine ourselves as independent agents who choose without constraint. We praise those who overcome their instincts and condemn those who fail. But this view may exaggerate our independence. We are shaped by our bodies, our upbringing, our culture, and our unconscious drives. To pretend that we float above these influences is comforting, but unrealistic. The idea of the free subject serves a purpose. It allows us to assign blame and praise. It supports systems of reward and punishment. But if human behavior is deeply rooted in instinct and circumstance, then moral judgment becomes more complicated. This does not mean we should abandon responsibility. It means we should understand it differently. There is also a tendency to glorify selflessness. We praise sacrifice, humility, and obedience. We treat the denial of one's own desires as a mark of virtue. But where did this valuation come from? Why do we instinctively admire those who suppress themselves? It may not be because self-denial is inherently noble. It may be because certain moral systems were created by those who lacked power and sought to elevate their own condition by redefining virtue. Imagine a group of people who are physically weak, politically powerless, or socially marginalized. They cannot dominate others through force, but they can redefine the meaning of strength. They can declare that humility is superior to pride, that patience is superior to aggression, that obedience is superior to command. In doing so, they invert the value system of the powerful. What was once called strength becomes labeled as arrogance or cruelty. What was once called weakness becomes called goodness. This inversion is subtle. It does not happen overnight. It unfolds over generations, slowly reshaping culture. Eventually, even the powerful begin to feel guilty for their strength. They begin to doubt themselves. They internalize the values of those who originally opposed them. Morality becomes a tool not just for guiding behavior, but for reshaping power. At the heart of human behavior lies something deeper than reason: a will to expand, to express, to assert. Every living thing strives to grow, to overcome obstacles, to shape its environment. This drive is not necessarily cruel or kind. It simply is. Yet traditional morality often mistrusts this drive. It asks us to suppress it, to tame it, to deny it. But what if this drive is not something to eliminate, but something to understand and refine? Self-hatred, guilt, and moral rigidity. Look closely at people who constantly speak of justice and fairness. Sometimes, beneath their words, there is a quiet anger, a sense of having been denied something. Morality can become a way of leveling the field, not by rising up, but by pulling others down. When excellence or ambition is viewed with suspicion, culture may begin to punish those who stand out. Yet not all moral systems are born from resentment. Some arise from abundance. A person who feels strong and secure does not need to condemn others to feel worthy. They can create their own standards. They can value courage, creativity, and independence. Their morality is not reactive, but expressive. This leads to a deeper question: who creates values? Most of us inherit them without thinking. We accept what our society calls good or evil. But occasionally, individuals emerge who question everything. They do not accept inherited standards. They ask whether those standards promote life, strength, and growth, or whether they stifle them. To move beyond good and evil is to step into this questioning space. It is not about becoming immoral. It is about becoming conscious of the origins of our morality. It is about recognizing that values are human creations, not divine commands etched into the universe. When we realize this, something unsettling happens. The ground beneath us shifts. If values are created, then they can be recreated. If morality is not fixed, then we bear the responsibility of shaping it. This is both liberating and frightening. Many people prefer certainty. They prefer clear rules and firm boundaries. But growth requires discomfort. It requires the courage to stand without guarantees, to think for oneself, to examine not only society's values, but one's own instincts and motives. The journey begins with suspicion. Not cynical suspicion, but honest curiosity. Why do I believe what I believe? Why do I call something good or evil? Whose interests does this belief serve? What instincts does it suppress or encourage? These questions do not have easy answers. They demand patience and self-examination. They force us to confront parts of ourselves we might rather ignore. But they also open the door to a new kind of freedom, not the freedom of doing whatever we want, but the freedom of consciously choosing our values. As we continue deeper into this exploration, we will begin to see how morality evolved through history, how religious and philosophical traditions shaped our ideas of virtue, and how power and psychology intertwine in ways we rarely notice. We will examine how resentment reshapes culture, how strength expresses itself differently in different eras, and what it might mean to become a creator of values rather than a follower. And once we look closely at these forces, the simple categories of good and evil will no longer feel so solid. They will begin to dissolve, revealing a far more complex and challenging landscape beneath them, a landscape where the real work of self-creation begins. If you look carefully at the history of morality, you begin to notice something unsettling. What we call good has not always meant the same thing. In earlier cultures, good often referred to nobility, strength, excellence, and the ability to command. A good person was someone powerful, capable, and proud. Their goodness was not about kindness or humility. It was about vitality and presence. They affirmed themselves without apology. Over time, that meaning shifted. Goodness became associated with meekness, obedience, patience, and self-denial. The strong became suspect. Pride was labeled a sin. Ambition was treated as dangerous. The ideal person was no longer the one who stood above others, but the one who lowered themselves. This transformation did not happen by accident. It reflected a deep psychological and cultural struggle. When people lack external power, they often turn inward. They cannot defeat their opponents physically or politically, so they reinterpret the world morally. Instead of saying, "I cannot dominate," they say, "Domination is evil." Instead of admitting weakness, they redefine weakness as virtue. In this way, morality becomes a creative act, a way of reshaping reality through interpretation. This shift gives birth to a powerful emotion, resentment. Not simple anger, which is open and direct, but a deeper, quieter bitterness. Resentment does not strike immediately. It waits. It thinks. It transforms powerlessness into moral superiority. It whispers, "You may be strong, but I am good." And over generations, that whisper becomes a cultural truth. When resentment takes root, it changes how people see themselves and others. Instincts like aggression, this suppression does not eliminate the impulses, it pushes them underground. And what happens to instincts that are constantly denied? They turn inward. Instead of expressing power outwardly, people begin to judge themselves. They create inner courts of guilt and self-criticism. Conscience becomes a kind of internalized punishment. The energy that once fueled action now fuels self-doubt. This internal conflict shapes entire civilizations. A culture that mistrusts strength will encourage conformity. It will praise safety over risk. It will prefer equality over excellence. On the surface, this may seem compassionate, but beneath it, something essential may be lost: the drive to exceed oneself. It is important to understand that strength here does not simply mean physical dominance. It means creative power, the ability to generate new ideas, new values, new forms of life. A society that fears difference and exceptional individuals risks stagnation. When everyone is encouraged to be the same, no one dares to stand apart. At the same time, blind admiration of power can lead to cruelty. So the challenge is not to return to some primitive celebration of force. The challenge is to recognize that life itself involves tension, struggle, and hierarchy. Growth requires resistance. Creativity often requires conflict. Without friction, there is no movement. Many moral systems try to eliminate conflict entirely. They dream of a world where everyone is equal, peaceful, and compliant. But such a world may also be flat and lifeless. Human beings are not identical units. We differ in talent, temperament, and ambition. Pretending otherwise may comfort us, but it does not reflect reality. This brings us to another uncomfortable insight: the belief in absolute equality may stem less from truth and more from desire. It may express a longing for security rather than an honest assessment of human difference. When we insist that everyone must be equal in every sense, we may be attempting to protect ourselves from feelings of inferiority. The same dynamic appears in the pursuit of truth. Many thinkers claim that they are guided purely by reason, free from bias. Yet beneath their arguments often lies a moral preference. They value certainty because uncertainty feels threatening. They prefer stable systems because chaos feels dangerous. Even the search for truth can be motivated by emotional needs. To move beyond good and evil requires intellectual courage. It means recognizing that our most cherished ideals may have hidden origins. It means questioning whether our morality enhances life or restricts it. Does it encourage strength, creativity, and growth? Or does it promote safety at the expense of vitality? This questioning does not provide easy answers. It dissolves comfort. When you realize that values are created, you can no longer rely on tradition alone. You must ask yourself what kind of life you want to affirm. What qualities do you genuinely admire? Which instincts do you choose to cultivate, and which do you discipline, not because society demands it, but because you have examined them honestly? Such self-examination demands independence. It requires stepping outside the herd mentality. Most people feel secure when they share opinions with others. Agreement provides warmth. Disagreement brings isolation. But the individual who seeks to create values must be willing to stand alone. Standing alone does not mean rejecting community entirely. It means refusing blind conformity. It means thinking deeply enough that your agreement with others becomes a conscious choice rather than a reflex. This kind of independence is rare because it is difficult. It asks you to confront your own motives without excuses. There is also danger in this path. Once traditional moral anchors loosen, a person can drift into nihilism, the belief that nothing has meaning. If values are human creations, one might conclude that they are arbitrary and pointless. But this is a misunderstanding. The absence of absolute foundations does not mean the absence of value. It means that value arises from life itself, from the act of affirming and shaping existence. The task, then, is not destruction for its own sake. It is transformation. It is learning to see morality as dynamic rather than fixed. It is recognizing that conflict, ambition, and even struggle have their place in a healthy culture. And it is accepting that strength and compassion are not always opposites, but can coexist when guided by self-awareness. As you reflect on these ideas, you may begin to notice how often moral language is used as a weapon. How quickly we judge, condemn, and categorize. How rarely we examine the deeper impulses behind those judgments. And once you see this, you cannot unsee, rather than merely react to them. To understand that, we must look closely at the psychology of independence, the discipline it requires, and the kind of character strong enough to bear the weight of freedom. There comes a moment, once old certainties begin to crumble, when a person feels both lighter and more exposed. If inherited morality no longer feels unquestionable, if truth itself is no longer a sacred idol, then something inside you must take responsibility. You can no longer hide behind tradition. You cannot simply say, "This is right because everyone says so." You are left facing yourself. And this is where the real challenge begins. It is easy to criticize existing values. It is easy to point out hypocrisy, to uncover hidden motives, to show how morality can grow out of fear or resentment. But tearing down is only the first step. The harder task is creation. If values are human creations, then who has the strength to create them consciously? Most people do not truly want this burden. They may speak of freedom, but they prefer guidance. They want clear rules, reliable authorities, shared beliefs. Freedom sounds appealing until it demands solitude and risk. To create values means accepting that you may stand apart. It means accepting misunderstanding, even hostility. The individual capable of this is not driven by bitterness. They are not reacting against society out of wounded pride. Their strength is not loud. It does not seek constant approval. Instead, it is rooted in an inner fullness. They do not create values because they lack something, but because they overflow with energy. Such a person understands their own instincts deeply. They do not pretend to be pure reason. They recognize that thought is influenced by desire, temperament, and experience. Instead of denying these influences, they integrate them. They become honest about their drives. This honesty is rare. Many people claim to act from noble principles while hiding their true motives even from themselves. They speak of justice when they seek revenge. They speak of humility when they crave recognition for their modesty. The individual who goes beyond good and evil strips away these illusions. They ask themselves difficult questions. Why do I want this? What part of me is speaking? Self-knowledge becomes a discipline, not a soft introspection, but a rigorous examination. One must be willing to see one's own contradictions, to admit that compassion can coexist with pride, that generosity can carry a hidden desire for control, that even love may contain elements of possession. When you stop dividing yourself into pure and impure parts, something shifts. Instead of suppressing your so-called darker instincts, you begin to understand them as sources of energy. Anger, for example, can be destructive when unconscious, but when recognized and directed, it can fuel courage and transformation. Ambition can become tyranny, but it can also drive excellence and innovation. The key is not elimination, but refinement. Life itself is a process of channeling forces. A river that is completely blocked becomes stagnant. A river without banks becomes a flood. Strength lies in shaping energy, not denying it. This kind of inner mastery is different from traditional moral discipline. It does not arise from obedience to external commandments. It arises from a desire to become more fully oneself. The question shifts from, is this good or evil, to, does this enhance or diminish my vitality? Does it expand my capacity to create, to think, to live deeply? Notice how different this feels. Instead of seeking moral purity, you seek growth. Instead of fearing judgment, you pursue development. You become less concerned with appearing virtuous and more concerned with becoming powerful in the sense of being capable, creative, and self-directed. This path requires solitude, not necessarily physical isolation, but independence of thought. You must be able to sit with your ideas without immediately seeking validation. You must tolerate uncertainty. Many people rush to align themselves with a group because doubt feels uncomfortable. But doubt can be fertile. It forces you to think more carefully. At the same time, independence does not mean rejecting others out of pride. The strongest individuals can engage with opposing views without feeling threatened. They do not need to silence disagreement. They see intellectual conflict as sharpening, not as a personal attack. Weakness, by contrast, often hides behind rigid dogma. There is also a certain lightness that emerges when you stop clinging to moral absolutes. You begin to see perspectives instead of enemies. You recognize that different moral systems reflect different conditions of life. Instead of condemning, you analyze, choosing your commitments consciously. It means loving what you affirm without pretending that it is universally binding for all people at all times. This way of living demands courage. Not dramatic heroism, but steady inner strength. The courage to admit uncertainty. The courage to think independently. The courage to bear responsibility for your own standards. And yet, even this is not the final stage. For once you begin creating your own values, another question arises. Can you affirm life entirely, including its suffering, its contradictions, its unpredictability? It is one thing to create standards for yourself when circumstances are favorable. It is another to embrace existence when it challenges you, when it wounds you, when it refuses to align with your preferences. Many moral systems promise escape from suffering, redemption in another world, ultimate justice beyond this life. But what if there is no such guarantee? What if the highest strength lies not in escaping life, but in affirming it completely? To affirm life means accepting that struggle is not a mistake, that pain is not always a punishment, that growth often comes through tension. It means saying yes to existence, not only in its pleasant moments, but in its harsh realities. This is a demanding ideal. It asks you to transform resentment into creativity, to turn obstacles into opportunities for expansion, to see conflict not as proof of injustice, but as part of the fabric of being alive. As you reflect on this, you may begin to sense that moving beyond good and evil is not about rejecting morality. It is about deepening it. It is about grounding it in strength rather than fear, in abundance rather than resentment. But what would it truly mean to affirm life so completely that you would accept it again and again, exactly as it is? What kind of spirit could carry such a weight without collapsing? To explore that question, we must examine a powerful and unsettling idea, one that tests whether your affirmation of life is genuine or merely conditional. And once you confront it, your understanding of strength, freedom, and responsibility will never be quite the same. Imagine, for a moment, that someone came to you in complete seriousness and said this: every choice you make, every joy you experience, every mistake, every humiliation, every success, every ordinary afternoon and sleepless night, you will live it all again. Not once more as a vague memory, but exactly the same, in every detail. And after you finish, it will begin again, and again, without end. Pause there. Don't treat it as poetry. Treat it as a real possibility. Would you feel crushed? Would you protest that it's unfair? Or would you quietly say yes? This thought is not meant to predict the structure of the universe. It is a test of your relationship to your own life. If the idea of living everything again fills you with dread, then perhaps you are living in quiet resistance. Perhaps you endure more than you affirm. But if you can imagine saying yes, even to the pain, then something in you has changed. To move beyond good and evil is not only to question moral categories. It is to examine your attitude toward existence itself. Do you accept life only on the condition that it becomes easier, cleaner, more just? Or can you embrace it as it is, imperfect, unpredictable, sometimes harsh? Most people live with hidden resentment. They may not admit it openly, but they carry a sense that life owes them something. They compare their reality to an imagined ideal. When reality falls short, they feel wronged. This resentment often disguises itself as moral judgment. They condemn the world for not matching their expectations. But what if strength lies in dropping that comparison? Affirming life does not mean pretending suffering is pleasant. It means recognizing that suffering is woven into growth. Every skill requires frustration. Every meaningful relationship involves vulnerability. Every ambitious project risks failure. To demand a life without discomfort is to demand a life without depth. When you imagine living your life again and again, you are forced to confront how you are living now. Are you making choices you would be willing to repeat? Are you shaping your days in a way you would accept eternally? This question has a sharpening effect. It cuts through excuses. If you spend your time in activities that drain you, surrounded by people you secretly resent, following paths chosen out of fear, the thought of eternal repetition becomes unbearable. But if you act from conviction, even when it is difficult, repetition becomes less threatening. Notice the shift here. Morality is no longer about obeying external rules. It becomes about authorship. You are writing a life you must be willing to. Conditions shape you. But within those conditions, you respond. And your responses accumulate into character. Character, in this sense, is not about appearing virtuous. It is about consistency of affirmation. It is about becoming someone who can look at their own existence without turning away. There is a certain hardness required for this. Not cruelty, but resilience. The ability to endure misunderstanding without collapsing. The ability to experience loss without becoming bitter. The ability to face your own flaws without hiding behind moral language. Many people seek comfort in certainty. They want final answers, clear doctrines, guaranteed outcomes. But life offers no such guarantees. To demand them is to remain dependent. The individual who moves beyond good and evil accepts uncertainty as part of the landscape. They do not cling to rigid systems for psychological security. This does not mean they drift aimlessly. On the contrary, they may have strong commitments. But those commitments are chosen consciously. They are not inherited unquestioningly. They are not defended out of fear. There is also a deeper transformation that occurs when you fully accept the repetition of life. Small moments begin to matter more. Conversations, habits, daily routines, they are no longer trivial. If you had to live them again forever, you would pay attention. You would shape them carefully. At the same time, you would waste less energy on regret. What is done is done. If you must live it again, then even your mistakes become part of the pattern you affirm. Regret can either trap you in resentment or push you toward refinement. The stronger path is refinement. This idea also changes how you view others. Instead of judging them quickly as good or evil, you see them as expressions of different strengths and weaknesses. Some are driven by fear, others by ambition, others by compassion. You may still oppose them, but you do so with clarity rather than hatred. Hatred often masks envy or insecurity. When you are secure in your own path, you do not need to reduce others to feel elevated. You focus on building rather than tearing down. There is a quiet dignity in this stance. It does not require applause. It does not demand agreement. It is rooted in an inner yes, a fundamental acceptance of existence. And yet, this affirmation is not naive optimism. It does not deny tragedy. It does not claim that everything happens for a reason. It simply refuses to let suffering become an argument against life itself. To live this way is demanding. It requires continuous self-examination. It requires you to ask, again and again, Am I living in a way I would choose repeatedly? Am I acting from strength or from resentment? Am I creating or merely reacting? Over time, these questions reshape you. You become less concerned with appearing moral and more concerned with becoming powerful in the sense of being capable and self-determined. You measure yourself not against abstract ideals, but against your own potential. Beyond good and evil lies this space of self-creation. A space where values are tools rather than chains. Where truth is pursued honestly, without pretending to be detached from instinct. Where life is embraced fully, not conditionally. And once you begin to live in that space, another realization emerges. The highest form of strength may not be dominance over others, but mastery over oneself, the ability to shape your drives, endure your challenges, and affirm your existence without apology. What would it look like to cultivate such mastery deliberately, day by day, in a world that constantly pushes conformity and comfort? That is where the final layer of this journey unfolds, not in abstract theory, but in the way you stand, decide, and live from this moment forward. Look around at the world you live in today, and you will notice something subtle but powerful. Everywhere, there is pressure to conform. Opinions move in waves. Outrage spreads quickly. Praise and condemnation are distributed almost instantly. It becomes easy to measure yourself by how well you align with the dominant tone of your environment. And without realizing it, you may begin adjusting your thoughts to avoid friction. In such a world, self-mastery becomes rare. It is not that people lack intelligence. It is that they lack independence. They absorb ideas without examining the instincts behind them. They adopt moral positions not because they have tested them against their own experience, but because those positions offer belonging. Agreement feels safe. Disagreement feels isolating. To move beyond good and evil in a modern context is to resist this pull. An anchored person does not rush to label every event as righteous or wicked. They observe. They analyze motives, including their own. They recognize that public morality often hides private interests. They understand that loud virtue can sometimes mask insecurity. But anchoring yourself does not mean becoming cold or detached. It means becoming deliberate. You choose your responses instead of inheriting them. Self-mastery begins with awareness of your drives. Within you are competing impulses. One part seeks comfort and approval. Another seeks challenge and growth. One part wants to avoid conflict. Another wants to assert itself. These forces do not disappear simply because you adopt a moral framework. They remain active beneath the surface. The person who lacks self-knowledge becomes a battleground for these forces. They justify their impulses after the fact, convincing themselves that whatever they desired was morally correct. They are not lying intentionally. They simply have not examined themselves deeply enough. But the person who aims for mastery pays attention. When anger rises, they do not immediately declare it righteous. They ask what triggered it. When envy appears, they do not hide it behind moral language. They examine what it reveals about their own aspirations. When compassion moves them, they ensure it is not merely a strategy for feeling superior. This level of honesty is uncomfortable. It strips away illusions, yet it also grants strength. You cannot shape what you refuse to see. Over time, this practice builds a certain solidity. You become less reactive, less easily provoked by trends, by public shaming, by shifting standards. Your sense of direction comes from within, shaped by careful reflection rather than emotional contagion. And with this solidity comes a new relationship to power. Power, in this deeper sense, is not about dominating others. It is about directing yourself. It is about setting long-term aims and enduring short-term discomfort in pursuit of them. It is about transforming obstacles into training rather than excuses. Consider how often people explain their stagnation by blaming circumstances. While circumstances matter, they are rarely the whole story. Two individuals can face similar conditions and respond very differently. One collapses into resentment. The other uses the resistance to sharpen their will. The difference lies in interpretation. If you interpret every setback as proof that the world is against you, you will shrink. If you interpret difficulty as part of growth, you will expand. The external event may be the same. The internal response changes everything. This is where moving beyond good and evil becomes practical rather than abstract. Instead of asking whether an event is fair, you ask how it can be used. Instead of dwelling on blame, you focus on capability. You shift from moral outrage to personal development. This does not mean tolerating injustice passively. It means responding from strength rather than bitterness. A person driven by resentment often seeks revenge or validation. A person grounded in mastery seeks effective action. There is also a creative dimension to this path. Once you stop relying entirely on inherited values, you are free to shape your own hierarchy of priorities. You decide what excellence means in your life. You define what kind of character you aim to embody. Perhaps you value intellectual honesty above social approval. Perhaps you prioritize resilience over comfort. Perhaps you choose depth over popularity. These choices become your compass. They guide decisions large and small. And because they are chosen consciously, they carry more weight. You are not obeying out of fear. You are committing out of clarity. Gradually, your life begins to reflect this authorship. Your relationships become more intentional. You spend time with those who challenge and expand you rather than those who simply echo your views. Your work becomes an expression of your strengths rather than a compromise made only for security. You also become more selective with your attention. In a world saturated with noise, attention is power. Where you place it shapes your character. If you constantly consume outrage, you become reactive. If you invest attention in learning, creating, and building, you become capable. This is the quiet revolution at the heart of going beyond good and evil. It is not about dramatic rebellion. It is about disciplined self-creation. It is about transforming your inner world so that external chaos has less control over you. And yet, this path never truly ends. Self-mastery is not a destination reached once and for all. New challenges arise. New temptations appear. Comfort can dull ambition. Success can inflate ego. Failure can be affirmed rather than conditionally accepted. Then you possess something durable. You are no longer merely reacting to the world's definitions of good and evil. You are participating in the creation of meaning. You are shaping a life you could, in principle, accept again and again. And in that quiet acceptance, without applause or moral grandstanding, you step into a rare form of freedom, the freedom of someone who has examined their foundations, faced their instincts, and chosen to live deliberately. The categories of good and evil may still exist in language. Society will continue to use them. But inside you, something more nuanced has taken root, a deeper awareness, a steadier will, a commitment not just to be judged as good, but to become strong, conscious, and fully alive. If you carry these ideas long enough, they begin to change not only how you see morality, but how you see humanity itself. You stop dividing people into heroes and villains quite so easily. You begin to notice layers. Strength mixed with insecurity. Kindness mixed with pride. Cruelty born from fear. The clean categories fade, replaced by something more complex and more honest. And with that honesty comes a certain loneliness. When you no longer fully participate in the simple language of good versus evil, conversations can feel shallow. Public debates often revolve around who is right and who is wrong, who is virtuous and who is corrupt. But you see the hidden motives, the competing drives, the struggle for influence beneath the surface. You understand that what appears as moral certainty is often psychological necessity. This awareness can isolate you if you are not careful. It can tempt you toward quiet superiority, toward looking down on those who still cling to rigid categories. But that would only be another trap, another expression of ego disguised as insight. True maturity here is quieter. It recognizes that most people need stable moral frameworks. Not everyone is ready to question the foundations of their beliefs. Stability has value. Shared codes allow societies to function. The goal is not to strip everyone of certainty, but to ensure that your own certainty is examined. There is a difference between using morality and being used by it. When morality uses you, you react automatically. You defend positions without reflection. You attack perceived enemies to strengthen your identity. Your sense of self depends on being on the right side. When you use morality consciously, you treat it as a tool. You recognize that rules serve life, not the other way around. You adapt when circumstances demand it. You are firm when firmness protects growth, and flexible when flexibility prevents stagnation. This flexibility requires inner strength. Weakness clings to rigid systems because it fears ambiguity. Strength can tolerate gray areas. It can admit complexity without collapsing into confusion. There is also a deeper reconciliation that begins to happen inside you. Earlier, we spoke of instincts, ambition, pride, aggression, compassion, love. Many moral systems attempt to rank these permanently. Some are labeled higher, others lower. But as you grow in awareness, you realize that context shapes value. Ambition can build civilizations or destroy relationships. Compassion can heal or enable dependency. Pride can inspire excellence or inflate ego. No instinct is purely angelic or purely demonic. The question is not which instinct to eliminate, but how to integrate them under conscious direction. This integration is what self-mastery truly means. Not suppression, not indulgence, but orchestration. Think of yourself as a composer. Within you are many instruments, some loud, some subtle. If you silence half of them, your music becomes thin. If you let them all play without coordination, the result is noise. But if you learn when to let each voice rise and when to soften it, something powerful emerges. This is not a moral formula. It is an art. And like any art, it requires practice. You will misjudge. You will sometimes allow ego to dominate when restraint was wiser. You will sometimes hold back when boldness was needed. But over time, reflection refines you. One sign of growth is a shift in how you relate to failure. Earlier in life, failure may have felt like a moral verdict, proof that you were inadequate or flawed. But once you move beyond rigid good and evil, failure becomes feedback. It becomes information about your limits and your potential. Instead of asking, "What does this say about my worth?" you ask, "What does this teach me about my strategy, my preparation, my assumptions?" Your identity becomes less fragile. You are no longer trying to preserve an image of goodness. You are trying to expand capacity. This expansion also changes how you, turning it into a weapon against others. There is a quiet confidence that develops from this perspective. You no longer need constant validation. Praise does not inflate you excessively. Criticism does not crush you completely. Both are filtered through your own standards, and those standards continue to evolve. Because once you accept that values are created, you realize they must be revised. As you grow, what once felt ambitious may begin to feel small. What once seemed impossible may become manageable. Your hierarchy of priorities shifts. This evolution keeps you alive internally. Stagnation often occurs when people cling to identities they have outgrown. They continue defending beliefs that no longer reflect their experience. But the person committed to self-creation allows themselves to change. Change, however, is not random. It is directed by a deeper commitment, a commitment to affirm life more fully. Affirming life does not mean chasing constant pleasure. It means embracing challenge as necessary. It means recognizing that comfort, while pleasant, can quietly weaken you if it becomes your highest value. A life oriented around ease tends to shrink. A life oriented around growth tends to expand. Growth requires tension. It requires stepping into situations where you might fail, where your weaknesses are exposed. This willingness to risk exposure is rare. Many prefer to remain in environments where they already feel competent. But the individual who seeks to move beyond inherited limits deliberately enters arenas that test them. Not recklessly, not for applause, but for expansion. And here, at this stage, something interesting happens. The question of good and evil becomes less central altogether. It fades into the background. What matters more is vitality versus stagnation, courage versus avoidance, awareness versus self-deception. You begin measuring your days not by how morally righteous they appeared, but by whether you acted deliberately, whether you confronted difficulty honestly, whether you advanced in some dimension of strength or understanding. This is a quieter morality, if we can still call it that. It does not shout. It does not seek converts. It operates internally. And as you embody it more consistently, you influence others without preaching. People sense stability. They sense depth. They may not articulate it, but they feel the difference between someone reacting to moral trends and someone grounded in examined conviction. In the end, moving beyond good and evil is not about abandoning ethics. It is about deepening them until they are inseparable from your character. It is about becoming someone who does not need rigid categories to act with integrity. You stand in the world aware of its complexity. You see the interplay of power, fear, ambition, and compassion. You accept that conflict is part of life. You understand that certainty is often an illusion. And still, you choose. You choose your values carefully. You refine them continuously. You accept responsibility for them. And in doing so, you become not merely a follower of morality, but a creator of meaning, someone capable of affirming existence without resentment, shaping instinct without denial, and living deliberately in a world that prefers simplicity over depth. That is the quiet strength waiting on the other side of good and evil. There is one final shift that happens when you truly absorb this way of thinking, and it is subtle but decisive. You stop asking what life means in some abstract, universal sense, and you begin asking what you are willing to mean within it. The focus moves from cosmic answers to personal authorship. For many people, the search for meaning is tied to certainty. They want assurance that their suffering serves a guaranteed purpose, that justice will ultimately balance every scale, that goodness will always be rewarded. These beliefs provide comfort. They soften the unpredictability of existence. But once you move beyond inherited moral structures, you can no longer rely on guaranteed cosmic fairness. The world does not promise symmetry. Effort does not always lead to success. Integrity does not always prevent loss. If you require these assurances in order to stay committed to life, your commitment will remain fragile. The deeper strength is different. It says, even without guarantees, I will engage fully. Even without certainty of reward, I will create. Even without universal validation, I will stand by my chosen standards. This stance transforms the way you experience responsibility. Responsibility is no longer a burden imposed by external authority. It becomes the natural consequence of freedom. If you are shaping your values consciously, at first, this can feel heavy. There is no one left to accuse, no doctrine to hide behind. But over time, it becomes empowering. When your life reflects your deliberate choices, even hardship carries a different weight. It is yours. You selected the direction, knowing the risks. This ownership builds dignity. Dignity here is not pride in appearing moral. It is the quiet steadiness of someone who does not betray themselves easily. When external pressures push you to conform against your convictions, you feel the tension clearly. You weigh the consequences. And if you choose to stand firm, you do so consciously, not impulsively. There will be costs. Independence is rarely free. You may lose approval. You may lose opportunities that require silent agreement with values you do not share. But you gain coherence. And coherence is a rare form of wealth. Coherence means your actions, your words, and your internal standards are aligned. There is less internal friction, less hidden self-contempt. You are not performing virtue while privately doubting yourself. You are living according to a framework you have examined and accepted. Over time, this coherence produces a kind of calm intensity. You do not need to prove yourself constantly. You are focused on refinement. Each challenge becomes material for growth. Each conflict becomes an opportunity to test your stability. And here is another important realization. Going beyond good and evil does not eliminate compassion. In fact, it can deepen it. When you stop viewing people as simply good or bad, you begin to understand the forces shaping them. You see how fear drives cruelty, how insecurity drives arrogance, how pain drives withdrawal. This does not mean you excuse destructive behavior. Boundaries remain necessary, but your response becomes more measured. You are less likely to hate blindly. Hatred often arises from oversimplification. When you recognize complexity, hatred loses some of its grip. You may still oppose. You may still fight for your chosen values, but you do so without dehumanizing automatically. This balance, strength without cruelty, clarity without arrogance, represents maturity. It is easier to swing between extremes, to become morally rigid and judgmental, or to become relativistic and indifferent. The middle path, where you create firm values while acknowledging complexity, demands continuous awareness. And awareness is work. You must watch yourself for signs of slipping into resentment. You must notice when success tempts you into superiority. You must recognize when comfort dulls your edge. The process never fully ends, but if you stay committed, something remarkable happens. Your life gains depth. Ordinary experiences become arenas for self-shaping. A disagreement becomes practice in measured strength. A failure becomes practice in resilience. A success becomes practice in humility. Even time itself feels different. You are no longer drifting from one distraction to another. You are engaged in a long project, the construction of character. Character, in this sense, is not fixed. It is dynamic. It evolves as you refine your instincts, clarify your standards, and expand your capabilities. You become less interested in short-term moral victories and more interested in long-term development. And perhaps this is the quiet heart of everything we have explored. Beyond good and evil lies the question, are you growing? Not growing in public image, not growing in moral reputation, but growing in strength, in awareness, in capacity to affirm life without bitterness. If the answer is yes, even slowly, unevenly, then you are participating in something rare. You are no longer merely reacting to inherited categories. You are shaping yourself intentionally. The world will continue to speak in the language of good and evil. That language is not disappearing. It serves social functions, but internally, you operate on a deeper level. You understand that morality is human, that values are forged, that strength and compassion must be integrated consciously. You live with fewer illusions, but also with fewer fears. And if someone were to ask you, quietly and seriously, whether you would be willing to live your life again exactly as it is, with its struggles, its imperfections, its unfinished ambitions, you would not answer lightly. You would reflect on the path you are shaping, on the integrity you are cultivating, on the way you respond to challenge. And if you can say yes, not because everything is perfect, but because you are committed to refining it, then you have stepped fully into the space beyond good and evil, not as a rebel without direction, not as a cynic without value. As you reach this point, something becomes clear that was easy to miss at the beginning. Moving beyond good and evil is not primarily a philosophical exercise. It is a transformation in posture. The way you stand in the world changes. The way you interpret events changes. Even the way you experience yourself changes. You begin to notice how often people outsource their judgment. They wait to see what their group thinks before deciding what they think. They measure truth by consensus. They measure virtue by applause. This habit is so common that it feels natural. But once you have tasted independence, it feels constricting. Independence, however, is not loud. It does not need to announce itself. In fact, the more secure it becomes, the less it seeks attention. There is no urgency to convert others. No need to win every argument. Your focus shifts from persuading the crowd to refining your own standards. This refinement is continuous. You test your beliefs against experience. You update them when evidence demands it. You remain loyal to your core commitments, but you do not freeze them in time. Rigidity signals fear. Adaptability signals strength. And strength here is not aggression. It is inner organization. A disorganized person is pulled in every direction by impulse, emotion, and social pressure. An organized person directs their impulses toward chosen aims. They are not free from desire. They are free within desire. They understand it, channel it, and use it. When challenges arise, and they always do, this organization becomes visible. The person still dependent on rigid moral categories may react dramatically. They may look for someone to blame, someone to condemn. They may need to declare the situation unjust in order to protect their self-image. But the self-directed individual asks a different question. What is required of me now? This question is powerful because it keeps attention on agency. Even in situations where control is limited, response remains possible. You may not choose the event, but you choose your posture toward it. Over years, these choices accumulate. They shape temperament. They shape reputation. They shape destiny. It becomes less important whether others classify you as good or bad. Those labels fluctuate with context. What remains steady is whether you can respect your own trajectory, whether you are expanding or shrinking, whether you are becoming more capable or more resentful. Resentment, at this stage, stands out clearly. It is the refusal to accept reality combined with the unwillingness to improve oneself. It feeds on comparison. It whispers that others are the reason you are limited. It finds comfort in moral condemnation because condemnation requires less effort than transformation. The alternative is harder but cleaner. It says, the world is imperfect, people are inconsistent, outcomes are uneven, and still, I will work on myself. This commitment does not deny systemic problems or real injustices. It simply refuses to let them become excuses for stagnation. It distinguishes between recognizing obstacles and building an identity around them. There is a subtle joy in this path. Not constant happiness, but satisfaction in self-direction. A sense that your life is not random, even if the world is unpredictable. You are engaged in shaping something, your character, your craft, your relationships. And as this engagement deepens, fear of judgment begins to lose its power. You realize that no external verdict can fully define you. Public opinion shifts. Cultural standards evolve. What was praised yesterday may be criticized tomorrow. If your identity depends entirely on these tides, you will always feel unstable. But if your identity rests on examined principles and disciplined growth, you remain steadier. You can listen to criticism without collapsing. You can accept praise without becoming dependent on it. There is also a reconciliation with limitation. Moving beyond good and evil does not mean imagining yourself limitless. It means understanding your strengths and weaknesses clearly. You stop pretending to be universally capable. You focus on cultivating what is genuinely yours to develop. This realism protects you from envy. When you see someone excelling in a domain outside your nature, you can appreciate it without feeling diminished. You recognize difference without translating it into hierarchy of worth. At the same time, you do not shrink from ambition. You choose ambitions aligned with your capacities and values. You pursue them with intensity, knowing that failure is possible, but stagnation is worse. Gradually, the language of life changes internally. Instead of asking, is this safe? You ask, is this growth? Instead of asking, will this make me look good? You evaluate yourself in moral extremes. You are no longer obsessed with purity. You are invested in progress. Progress here is not linear. There will be regressions. Old habits will resurface. Ego will reassert itself. Comfort will tempt you. But because you are attentive, these slips become signals rather than catastrophes. You adjust. You recalibrate. You continue. This continuity is what ultimately matters. Not perfection. Not heroic gestures. But steady refinement. In the end, Moving beyond good and evil leads you back to something very simple and very demanding: live consciously, know your drives, choose your values, accept responsibility, affirm existence without waiting for guarantees. It is not a path for everyone. Many will prefer the security of fixed answers and shared outrage. And that is understandable. Certainty feels safe. But for those willing to step into complexity, who can tolerate ambiguity without losing direction, who can confront their own instincts without denial, there is a different kind of freedom available. A freedom rooted not in the absence of structure, but in self-created structure. Not in rebellion for its own sake, but in disciplined independence. Not in moral superiority, but in deepened humanity. And from that place, you do not need to declare that you have gone beyond good and evil. You simply live in a way that makes the old categories feel too small for the life you are building. At the very end of this journey, what remains is not a new doctrine, not a replacement system of rigid beliefs, but a different kind of human being. Someone less fragile, less dependent on approval, less eager to divide the world into simple moral camps. Someone who has learned to carry complexity without collapsing into confusion. If you trace the path carefully, you see how it unfolded. First came suspicion, the realization that our ideas of truth and morality are not as pure or eternal as we assume. That behind every philosophy stands a temperament. Behind every moral rule stands a history. This suspicion was unsettling, because it removed the comfort of unquestioned certainty. Then came psychological honesty, the recognition that instincts drive thought more than we like to admit. That resentment can disguise itself as righteousness. That weakness can invent moral superiority to compensate for its lack of force. This stage required courage, because it forced you to look inward, not just outward. After that came responsibility, the understanding that if values are human creations, then you cannot hide behind them. You must shape your own standards deliberately. You must decide what kind of strength you respect, what kind of life you are willing to affirm. You became less concerned with being called good and more concerned with becoming capable. Then came affirmation, the test of whether you could say yes to existence itself. Not because it is perfect, not because it guarantees fairness, but because you choose to engage fully, even in its unpredictability. The thought of living your life again and again became a measure of your integrity. Are you building something you could stand behind repeatedly? Finally came integration, the ability to hold your instincts without denial, to refine them without suppressing them, to combine strength with awareness. You stopped trying to eliminate parts of yourself in the name of purity. You began orchestrating them toward growth. What emerges from all this is not a saint and not a tyrant. It is a self-directed individual. A self-directed individual does not wait for moral trends to tell them who they are. They do not panic when cultural standards shift. They adapt where necessary, but their core remains examined and chosen. They understand that society will always operate with simplified categories. Good and evil will always be used as tools of organization and control. But internally, they operate with greater nuance. This nuance does not make them passive. It makes them precise. When action is required, they act. When opposition is necessary, they oppose. But they do so from clarity, not from borrowed outrage. Their energy is conserved for what truly aligns with their chosen values. There is a quiet fearlessness that grows here. Not recklessness, but reduced anxiety about judgment. When you no longer rely entirely on being seen as good, you are freer to take risks. You are freer to explore unconventional ideas. You are freer to admit mistakes. Mistakes no longer threaten your moral identity. They challenge your strategy. This distinction changes everything. At the same time, humility deepens. Because once you recognize that all values are shaped by perspective and condition, you understand your own limits. Your framework is strong, but it is not absolute. Assume that disagreement equals evil. You recognize that different forms of life generate different moral codes. And this brings us to one of the most mature realizations of all. Growth is not about proving others wrong. It is about expanding your own capacity. The world is full of arguments, endless debates about who holds the moral high ground. But the person who has moved beyond good and evil is less interested in winning these battles and more interested in building themselves. They measure progress internally. Are they stronger than last year? More disciplined? More aware of their blind spots? More capable of turning adversity into development? If the answer is yes, even gradually, then they are on the right path. This path is demanding because it offers no final resting place. There is no ultimate badge of moral completion. There is only ongoing refinement, ongoing authorship, ongoing confrontation with your own tendencies toward comfort, resentment, and self-deception. But there is also deep vitality in it. You feel alive when you are actively shaping yourself, when you are not drifting through borrowed opinions, when you are not numbing discomfort with distraction, when you are choosing deliberately. And perhaps that is the final insight. Beyond good and evil lies not chaos, not moral emptiness, but intensified life. A life in which you take full responsibility for your standards. A life in which you examine your instincts instead of hiding from them. A life in which you affirm existence not because it is guaranteed to reward you, but because you decide to engage with it completely. The categories of good and evil will continue to exist around you. They are woven into language, law, and culture. But within you, a deeper structure has formed. You understand that morality can be an expression of strength or of resentment. That truth can be pursued honestly or used as a shield. That freedom without discipline becomes emptiness, and discipline without freedom becomes oppression. So you aim for integration. You cultivate strength without cruelty, ambition without bitterness, confidence without arrogance, independence without isolation, compassion without self-erasure. And you accept that this balance will never be perfect. It will require attention for as long as you live. If someone were to ask you now what it means to go beyond good and evil, you would not respond with a slogan. You would not offer a formula. You might simply say that it means growing up fully, taking ownership of your values, refining your instincts, affirming life without resentment. It means becoming the kind of person who does not need simple moral labels to act with depth and integrity. And that is not an abstract philosophy. It is a daily practice, quiet, demanding, and transformative, carried out in how you think, how you choose, and how you stand in the world when no one is watching. If you step back now and look at the entire arc of this journey, you may notice something surprising. What began as a challenge to morality has ended as a challenge to you. The focus has slowly shifted from questioning ideas to questioning your posture, your habits, your reflexes. The real confrontation was never with society alone. It was with your own comfort. It is comfortable to inherit values. It is comfortable to belong to a moral tribe. It is comfortable to know, without doubt, who is right and who is wrong. These comforts create stability, but they also create limitation. They reduce the complexity of life to manageable slogans. To move beyond that is to accept a certain tension as permanent. You will not always have clean answers. You will not always feel morally certain. You will sometimes act, then reflect, then adjust. Growth replaces rigidity, and growth, by its nature, never fully settles. There is a temptation, after understanding all of this, to turn it into another fixed identity. To say, I am someone who is beyond good and evil. But the moment you crystallize it into a label, you risk losing the fluidity that made it powerful. The point was never to adopt a new badge. It was to cultivate awareness. Awareness of where your judgments come from. Awareness of how resentment can disguise itself as virtue. Awareness of how fear can create rigid morality. Awareness of how strength can become cruelty if left unexamined. This awareness becomes your compass. It does not eliminate error, but it reduces self-deception. You will still feel anger. You will still judge. You will still prefer certain people and oppose others. But now, there is space between impulse and action. In that space lies authorship. Authorship is perhaps the most important word here. You are the author of your stance toward life. You did not. Two people can endure similar hardship. One becomes bitter and builds an identity around grievance. The other becomes disciplined and builds an identity around mastery. The difference lies not in the event itself, but in the meaning assigned to it. Once you understand this, victimhood loses its appeal, not because pain disappears, but because clinging to resentment begins to feel like self-sabotage. You see clearly that every moment spent nurturing bitterness is a moment not spent building strength. This does not mean suppressing legitimate anger. It means using it as fuel rather than as a permanent residence. As the years pass, this mindset compounds. Small daily decisions, how you respond to criticism, how you handle boredom, how you react to success, accumulate into character. Character shapes opportunity. Opportunity shapes trajectory. Gradually, you become someone whose life reflects intention more than accident. And perhaps the most profound change is this: you stop needing life to justify itself to you. You no longer demand that existence prove its goodness before you agree to participate. You participate because you choose to. This choice is quiet, but it is powerful. It means you accept that suffering will come, and you prepare yourself to meet it. It means you accept that joy will come, and you receive it without clinging. It means you accept that you will make mistakes, and you commit to refining yourself rather than collapsing into shame. There is a maturity in this acceptance. a groundedness. You begin to see that many people remain trapped not because they lack intelligence, but because they fear the responsibility of freedom. It is easier to blame systems entirely, easier to follow inherited scripts, easier to divide the world cleanly into saints and villains. But easy paths rarely lead to depth. Depth requires confrontation, with your assumptions, with your instincts, with your capacity for self-deception. It requires enduring periods of uncertainty without rushing back to old certainties for comfort. And in that endurance, something solid forms. You become less reactive, less easily manipulated by moral panic, less swayed by public approval. You do not drift with every cultural shift. You observe, evaluate, and then decide. This does not isolate you from society. It allows you to engage with it more consciously. You can cooperate without surrendering your judgment. You can disagree without hatred. You can lead without craving dominance. The old language of good and evil still exists. It always will. It plays a role in law, in education, in social cohesion. But internally, you operate from a deeper layer. A layer that asks not simply, is this allowed, or is this praised, but, does this align with the person I am deliberately becoming? That question becomes your North Star. And when you answer it honestly, day after day, you create a life that feels authored rather than accidental. You begin to sense that meaning is not discovered in a distant realm. It is forged in the discipline of self-creation. In the end, going beyond good and evil is not about rejecting morality. It is about refusing to be unconsciously ruled by it. It is about transforming moral language from a cage into a tool. You emerge not as a rebel without direction, nor as a detached observer of life, but as an engaged creator, someone who has faced the instability of existence and chosen to stand firm anyway. And that firmness is not rigid. It is alive. It evolves. It sharpens itself through challenge. If you carry this forward, the journey does not end here. It continues in every decision you make, every ambition you pursue, every difficulty you encounter. Each moment becomes another opportunity to affirm life consciously, to refine your character, to act from strength rather than resentment. That is the lasting impact of stepping beyond good and evil. Not a new ideology, but a new way of standing in the world, alert, self-directed, and unafraid to take full responsibility for the life you are shaping. Now, after walking through all of this, there is one more layer that must be faced, and it is perhaps the most uncomfortable one of all. Once you accept that values are created, that morality is shaped by perspective, that strength and weakness often hide behind noble language, you can no longer pretend innocence. You can no longer say, I didn't know. You become aware that every belief you hold serves something inside you. This realization strips away a certain purity. It becomes clear that even your highest ideals are connected to your nature. The discipline you admire reflects your respect for control. The independence you value reflects your discomfort with submission. The compassion you practice, neutral, objective standpoint from which pure morality can be constructed. Human beings do not operate from nowhere. We operate from our drives, our experiences, our strengths, our limitations. The goal was never to escape that. The goal was to become conscious of it. When you become conscious of your foundation, you stop pretending that your values are universal truths written into the fabric of the cosmos. You recognize them as powerful, meaningful, but ultimately human creations. And this recognition brings both humility and power. Humility, because you know your framework is not the only possible one. Power, because you are no longer unconsciously controlled by it. This dual awareness reshapes ambition. Earlier in life, ambition may have been about proving yourself, to parents, to peers, to society. It may have been fueled by insecurity, by comparison, by the need to be seen as worthy. But once you move through the deeper layers of self-examination, ambition becomes quieter. It is less about validation and more about expansion. You pursue mastery not because others demand it, but because stagnation feels like self-betrayal. You build not to silence critics, but because creation expresses your vitality. The audience becomes secondary. The work itself becomes primary. This shift also alters how you experience solitude. For many, solitude feels threatening. Without external affirmation, doubt creeps in. But when your values are self-examined and consciously chosen, solitude becomes fertile. It becomes a space where you recalibrate, where you refine your thinking without noise. You are no longer afraid of your own mind. At the same time, you recognize that complete isolation is not strength. Human beings are social creatures. The challenge is not to detach from others, but to relate without losing yourself. To engage deeply without dissolving into conformity. This balance requires constant awareness. It is easy to overcorrect, to become contrarian simply to protect independence. But automatic opposition is just another form of reaction. True independence is selective. Sometimes you agree, sometimes you disagree. The key is that the choice is deliberate. Over time, this deliberate stance produces a distinctive presence. You speak less impulsively. You judge less hastily. When you do commit to a position, it carries weight because it is considered. And perhaps most importantly, you become harder to manipulate. Moral manipulation is one of the oldest tools in human history. Appeal to guilt. Appeal to fear. Appeal to the desire to belong. Many decisions are shaped not by reason, but by the discomfort of standing alone. But when you have practiced standing alone internally, external pressure loses intensity. You can endure temporary disapproval without abandoning your judgment. You can listen without immediately surrendering. This does not make you stubborn. It makes you stable. And stability, in a world driven by emotional swings, is rare. As the years unfold, you may notice something else. The sharp need to label yourself diminishes. You do not need to call yourself virtuous, rebellious, enlightened, or beyond anything. Labels served a purpose when identity felt fragile. Now they feel unnecessary. What matters is direction. Are you deepening your awareness? Are you refining your instincts? Are you building strength without becoming rigid? Are you integrating compassion without weakening your boundaries? These questions replace the old obsession with moral status. And there is a quiet peace in that replacement. Not the peace of certainty, but the peace of coherence. Your inner world is less divided. You are not fighting yourself as violently as before. The war between what you desire and what you believe becomes more integrated because you have consciously shaped the beliefs. This integration does not eliminate struggle. It transforms it. Struggle becomes developmental rather than destructive. Even doubt changes character. It no longer paralyzes. It sharpens. It pushes you to examine assumptions, to gather more understanding, to refine your stance. Doubt becomes an ally instead of an enemy. In this way, the journey that began with suspicion of morality ends with trust in self, direction. Not blind trust, not arrogance, but earned trust, built from years of reflection, correction, and conscious choice. You may still use the language of good and evil in everyday conversation. It remains practical shorthand. But internally, you know that life operates on deeper currents: power and vulnerability, fear and courage, stagnation and growth, resentment and affirmation. And your commitment is clear. You choose growth over stagnation. You choose awareness over self-deception. You choose creation over bitterness. Of what it means to step beyond inherited morality. Not as an escape from ethics, but as an evolution of them. You become someone who no longer asks merely, what is considered good, but instead asks, what strengthens life? What deepens character? What expands my capacity to engage fully with existence? In that shift, something profound settles into place. You are no longer searching for permission to live deliberately. You are simply living, alert, self-aware, and fully responsible for the meaning you continue to create. At the very end of this long reflection, what remains is not a grand conclusion, but a mirror. Everything we have explored ultimately turns back toward you. Not toward society, not toward philosophers, not toward history, but toward the way you think when no one is listening. The way you choose when no one is watching. The way you interpret your own successes and failures in private. Because that is where morality truly lives. Not in slogans. Not in public debates. But in the quiet architecture of your inner world. When you first begin questioning good and evil, it feels intellectual. You analyze concepts. You dissect traditions. You challenge inherited beliefs. But if the questioning is honest, it eventually becomes personal. You begin to see that your own judgments are not pure. They are shaped by your temperament, your wounds, your ambitions. And that realization can feel destabilizing. Yet if you do not run from it, if you allow it to deepen, something steadier begins to form. You stop needing your judgments to make you feel superior. You stop needing your beliefs to be universal in order to feel valid. You become more interested in whether they are functional, whether they strengthen your character and align with the life you are building. This shift changes how you experience conflict. When someone disagrees with you, the old reflex might have been to defend your moral identity, to prove that you are on the right side. But now, disagreement becomes information. You listen for what sharpens you. You discard what weakens you. You do not collapse, and you do not lash out automatically. You have learned to separate your ego from your framework. That separation is subtle but powerful. It allows you to update your views without feeling that your core is threatened. It allows you to admit error without spiraling into shame. It allows you to hold conviction without becoming brittle. Over time, this flexibility becomes a kind of strength that others notice, even if they cannot name it. You are not easily provoked into moral outrage. Not because you are indifferent, but because you are deliberate. You choose when to invest energy. You choose which battles align with your long-term direction. You no longer waste yourself reacting to every stimulus. This conservation of energy matters. Life is finite. Attention is limited. If you scatter your focus across endless moral skirmishes, you will have little left for creation. And creation, in the end, is the highest expression of moving beyond good and evil. Creation of skill, creation of discipline, creation of relationships grounded in respect rather than dependency, creation of a self that can withstand reality without bitterness. There is something deeply stabilizing about orienting your life toward creation instead of condemnation. Condemnation is reactive. It feeds on what already exists. Creation is generative. It builds what did not exist before. The more you commit to building, the less obsessed you become with judging. This does not mean you abandon standards. On the contrary, your standards become sharper, but they are primarily applied inward. You hold yourself accountable first. You expect discipline from yourself before demanding it from others. That internal order radiates outward. You begin to attract people who respect clarity and strength. You distance yourself from environments that thrive on victimhood or constant moral drama. You become selective not out of arrogance, but out of preservation. And perhaps the most significant change is this: you no longer fear life's uncertainty as much as you once did. When you depended on rigid moral systems for security, uncertainty felt dangerous. If the rules shifted, you felt destabilized. But now, your stability comes from your capacity to adapt and refine. Even when circumstances change, your commitment to awareness and growth remains. That commitment becomes your anchor. There will still be hardship. There will still be moments of doubt. There will still be internal conflict. Moving beyond good and evil does not eliminate the human condition. It intensifies your engagement with it, but you meet it differently. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you ask, "How can I use this?" Instead of asking, "Who?" reshape your destiny. Because destiny is not only what happens to you, it is how you shape yourself in response to what happens. And when you consistently choose growth over resentment, awareness over self, deception, responsibility over excuse, you begin to embody a rare kind of maturity. Not moral perfection, not emotional numbness, but integration. You are not split between what you desire and what you believe. You have examined both and brought them into alignment. You are not performing goodness for approval. You are refining strength for coherence. You are not waiting for the world to validate your existence. You are validating it through deliberate action. In that state, the old question, "Is this good or evil?" loses its central place. A new question takes over. Is this aligned with the person I am becoming? That question is dynamic. It evolves as you evolve. It demands honesty. It demands reflection. It demands courage. But it also grants freedom. Because when you live by consciously chosen standards, when you affirm life without demanding guarantees, when you shape your instincts rather than suppress or indulge them blindly, you step into authorship. And authorship is the quiet power at the heart of everything we have explored. To move beyond good and evil is not to reject morality. It is to mature beyond dependence on inherited categories. It is to build a self strong enough to hold complexity, flexible enough to adapt, and disciplined enough to grow. It is to stand in the world without illusions, and still say yes. Yes to responsibility. Yes to refinement. Yes to existence as the raw material of your own becoming. And from that yes, everything else follows. If you sit quietly with everything that has unfolded, you begin to realize that this journey was never about destroying morality. It was about strengthening the individual who lives within it. The early stages felt like demolition, questioning truth, questioning virtue, questioning the motives behind compassion, humility, equality, justice. It felt almost dangerous, as if removing those supports might collapse everything. But what actually collapses is not life itself, it is dependency. Dependency on borrowed convictions. Dependency on moral applause. Dependency on clear enemies to define your identity. When those fall away, what remains is not emptiness. What remains is responsibility. And responsibility, when fully accepted, changes the quality of your existence. You no longer wake up asking what the world demands from you morally. You wake up asking what you demand from yourself. You measure your day not by how well you performed goodness for others, but by how honestly and deliberately you acted according to your chosen standards. This shift produces a different kind of ambition. It is not frantic. It is not desperate. It does not require constant comparison. It is steady, focused, internal. You are not trying to win the moral scoreboard of society. You are trying to become more capable than you were yesterday. You are trying to sharpen your thinking, discipline your habits, strengthen your character. And in doing so, something interesting happens. You become less judgmental in shallow ways, but more demanding in deep ways. You are less interested in labeling people as evil for their flaws, but you are more attentive to patterns of weakness, especially your own. You do not excuse laziness by calling it self-care. You do not romanticize envy by calling it social awareness. You recognize when you are avoiding effort. The honesty becomes precise. Precision replaces drama. You begin to see that much of what passes as moral debate is noise, emotional discharge without transformation. But you are focused on transformation, on construction, on internal architecture. Architecture is the right word. You are building something inside yourself, a structure that can withstand pressure. A structure made of examined values, disciplined instincts, refined perception. Each decision adds a brick. Each reflection strengthens the foundation. And because this structure is self-built, it fits you. It is not imposed. It is not inherited blindly. It reflects your temperament, your aspirations, your understanding of life. That does not mean it is infallible. It means it is alive. You revise it when necessary. You reinforce it when tested. You expand it as you grow. There is a quiet pride in that process. Not arrogance, but satisfaction. The satisfaction of knowing that your strength is earned, not borrowed. And this earned strength changes your relationship to power. Earlier, power might have meant control over others, influence, status, recognition. But now, power means coherence. It means the ability to direct yourself consistently to do not destroy the core. Because the core is not built on external approval. You also begin to recognize how rare this orientation is. Many people remain entangled in moral theatrics, constantly proving, condemning, defending. They are exhausted by outrage, drained by comparison, dependent on affirmation. Their energy is scattered. Your energy, by contrast, becomes concentrated. You are selective about what deserves your reaction. You conserve attention for what builds you. You are willing to be misunderstood if understanding requires compromising your coherence. And there is freedom in that willingness. Freedom from needing to be liked universally. Freedom from needing to appear morally flawless. Freedom from the endless anxiety of public validation. Instead, you operate from internal alignment. Alignment between thought and action. Between ambition and discipline. Between instinct and reflection. That alignment produces calm intensity. You are serious about growth, but not frantic. You are ambitious, but not desperate. You are self-aware, but not paralyzed by analysis. You act. Action becomes the proof of your philosophy. Not loud declarations, not ideological battles, but steady work, skill building, habit refinement, character development. Over time, this orientation reshapes your identity entirely. You are no longer someone who defines themselves by opposition, not someone who exists primarily to reject what they see as wrong. You are someone who builds what they see as strong. And that shift from opposition to creation is perhaps the final liberation, because opposition ties you to what you resist. Creation frees you to focus on what you value. At this stage, even the concept of being, beyond good and evil, feels secondary. It was a doorway, not a destination. The real destination was self-mastery. Self-mastery not as repression, but as integration. Self-mastery not as moral perfection, but as disciplined growth. Self-mastery not as superiority over others, but as command over your own direction. And from that mastery emerges something rare, serenity in motion. You are not passive. You are constantly refining. But you are not internally chaotic. Your energy flows toward development rather than toward resentment. If someone were to ask you now what defines a strong human being, you might answer differently than you once would have. Strength is not loud dominance. It is not rigid moral certainty. It is not constant criticism of others. Strength is the ability to look at reality without illusion, to look at yourself without denial, and still choose to build, still choose to refine, still choose to affirm. And when you live from that place consistently, something settles deep inside you, a grounded confidence, a sense that no matter how complex the world becomes, you are equipped to navigate it consciously. You no longer need the comfort of simple categories. You have something stronger. You have authorship. And with authorship comes the quiet understanding that your life is not a moral performance, but a work in progress, shaped deliberately, refined patiently, and affirmed fully, even in its imperfection. If you have followed this path all the way here, there is one last refinement to make, and it may be the most demanding of all. Up to this point, you have examined morality, uncovered hidden motives, reclaimed responsibility, cultivated self-mastery, and shifted from resentment to creation. You have learned to stand without relying on inherited certainty. But now a deeper question emerges. Can you love the process itself? Not just endure it. Not just use it strategically. But genuinely value the endless refinement, the constant overcoming, the perpetual incompleteness of being human. Because here is the quiet truth: there is no final arrival. There is no permanent state where you become fully formed, fully wise, fully beyond error. If you are alive, you are in motion. And if you are in motion, you are unfinished. Many people resist this. They want closure. They want a stable identity they can defend for the rest of their lives. They want to say, "This is who I am," and stop there. But the individual who has moved beyond rigid morality understands something different. Identity is not a fixed monument. It is an evolving structure. And clinging too tightly to yesterday's version of yourself becomes a subtle form of stagnation. So the final layer of strength is the willingness to outgrow yourself. To question not only society's values, but your own established convictions. To recognize when a belief that once strengthened you has become a limitation. To refine your ambitions as your capacity expands. This requires humility at a higher level. Earlier, end of your development. This does not mean instability. It means vitality. A tree that refuses to grow becomes deadwood. A mind that refuses to evolve becomes dogmatic. A character that refuses correction becomes brittle. The mature individual avoids both extremes, neither dissolving into relativism nor freezing into rigidity. They hold strong values, but they remain capable of revision. And that revision is guided by one central principle. Does this strengthen life? Not comfort, not popularity, not moral appearance, but life, in the sense of vitality, depth, courage, creativity, integration. When you use that measure consistently, many distractions fall away. Petty arguments lose their appeal. Superficial validation becomes less tempting. You begin to see how much of the world operates on reactive cycles: outrage, applause, condemnation, repetition. You step outside that rhythm, not because you are detached from society, but because your primary allegiance is to growth. Growth of perception, growth of discipline, growth of resilience, growth of creative output. And with that allegiance comes a profound shift in how you experience time. Time is no longer something to be passed or entertained away. It becomes material, raw material for refinement. Each year is an opportunity to deepen your structure. Each difficulty is a tool. Each success is a test of humility. Even aging itself changes meaning. Instead of fearing it as decline alone, you see it as accumulation of insight, of pattern recognition, of internal solidity. You become less reactive because you have seen cycles repeat. You have witnessed how moral trends rise and fall. You understand that what feels urgent today may feel trivial tomorrow. This perspective grants patience. Patience not as passivity, but as strategic calm. And from that calm, your actions become more deliberate. You choose projects that matter. You build relationships that align with your direction. You withdraw from environments that drain without strengthening. This selectivity is not selfishness. It is stewardship of your energy. Because energy is finite. And where you invest it determines the shape of your life. If you invest it in resentment, you build bitterness. If you invest it in validation, seeking, you build dependency. If you invest it in disciplined creation, you build capacity. By now, the language of good and evil feels almost secondary. It served as the entry point. But what replaced it is more demanding and more liberating. You no longer ask, "Am I morally pure?" You ask, "Am I growing?" You no longer ask, "Who is to blame?" You ask, "What can I build from this?" You no longer ask, "How do I appear?" You ask, "Who am I becoming?" And those questions, repeated consistently over years, shape a life that feels authored, not perfect, not immune to suffering, but coherent. There is a quiet joy in coherence. A sense that your internal world is not fragmented by contradiction, that your actions reflect your reflection, that your ambitions align with your discipline. This joy is not loud. It does not seek applause. It is private and steady. It is the satisfaction of knowing that you are not hiding from yourself. In the end, that may be the deepest meaning of moving beyond good and evil. Not the rejection of morality, but the refusal to use it as a shield against self-examination. You stop hiding behind inherited ideals. You stop excusing weakness with noble language. You stop demanding guarantees from existence. And instead, you step forward as a conscious participant in your own becoming. You accept that life is complex. You accept that you are complex. You accept that growth is endless. And you choose, deliberately, to engage in that growth without resentment. That choice, repeated daily, refined yearly, strengthened through hardship, becomes your philosophy in action. Not a doctrine you preach. Not a system you impose. But a way of standing in the world, alert, disciplined, adaptive, and unafraid to take responsibility for the meaning you continue to create. And when you reach that point, the old question fades quietly into the background. You are no longer trying to be good. You are no longer afraid of being called evil. At this final stretch of reflection, what stands out is not a philosophy carved in stone, but a posture that must be renewed every day. You might think that after questioning morality, reclaiming responsibility, embracing self-mastery, and committing to growth, the journey would stabilize into something secure and permanent. But it does not. What stabilizes is not certainty, it is vigilance. Because even after all this insight, the old temptations return. The temptation to blame instead of build. The temptation to conform instead of think. The temptation to seek comfort instead of expansion. The temptation to disguise weakness in moral language. These do not disappear simply because you understand them. Awareness does not eliminate impulse. It only gives you the ability to respond consciously. And this is where the philosophy becomes real. It is not tested in abstract debate. It is tested on ordinary days. In small frustrations. In subtle envy. In moments where no one would notice if you compromised your standards. This is where authorship either holds or dissolves. Because being beyond good and evil is not about dramatic rebellion or intellectual superiority. It is about microscopic decisions made consistently. It is about catching yourself when resentment begins to grow and choosing instead to redirect that energy into development. It is about noticing when you are tempted to join moral outrage simply to belong, and pausing long enough to examine whether it aligns with your values. Most people live reactively. Their emotional state is shaped by headlines, social currents, and other people's opinions. They are pulled constantly, like leaves in the wind. They mistake intensity for depth. But the self-directed individual develops a center of gravity. This center does not prevent movement. It prevents chaos. You can engage passionately in the world without being swallowed by it. You can care deeply without becoming hysterical. You can oppose without dehumanizing. You can lead without dominating. And perhaps most importantly, you can fail without collapsing. Failure becomes one of the most honest teachers on this path. It reveals where your strength was overstated. It exposes where discipline was weaker than intention. It forces recalibration. The difference now is that failure no longer threatens your identity. You are not trying to protect an image of moral correctness. You are refining a structure. If a beam cracks, you reinforce it. You do not abandon the entire building. Over time, this approach creates resilience that is difficult to shake. Criticism does not feel like annihilation. Praise does not feel like salvation. Both are data. Both are filtered through your internal framework. And that internal framework remains alive because you continue questioning it. This is crucial. The moment you stop examining yourself, you drift back into unconsciousness. You begin to believe your own narrative too completely. You risk turning yourself, created values into rigid dogma. So the practice continues. You revisit your assumptions. You observe your emotional reactions. You ask yourself uncomfortable questions. Are you pursuing excellence or chasing validation? Are you setting boundaries from strength or from fear? Are you choosing discipline for growth or punishing yourself to feel superior? These questions keep you honest. Honesty, in this sense, is not about confessing to others. It is about refusing to lie to yourself. And this refusal becomes your quiet power. The world will always offer distractions, ideological battles, identity labels, moral theater. It will tempt you with quick certainty and group belonging. It will reward outrage and punish nuance. But you have seen what lies beneath that surface. You know that strength is not loud condemnation. You know that weakness often hides behind righteousness. You know that true growth requires solitude, discomfort, and deliberate effort. So you return, again and again, to the fundamentals. Discipline in daily habits, clarity in thought, ownership of mistakes, measured ambition, constructive use of adversity. You stop waiting for the world to become less chaotic. Instead, you become more organized internally. And as your internal order strengthens, something remarkable happens. You feel less threatened by external disorder. You recognize that you cannot control everything, and you stop pretending that you should. Your focus narrows to what is within reach, your effort, your attitude, your direction. This narrowing is not smallness. It is precision. Precision allows depth. Depth allows mastery. And mastery allows freedom. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from inner fragmentation. You are no longer divided between who you appear to be and who you are. Between your life. It internalizes it. It transforms it from external command into internal craft. You craft your character. You craft your priorities. You craft your responses. And you accept that this craft is never complete. There will always be another layer to refine. Another habit to sharpen. Another blind spot to uncover. But instead of exhausting you, this becomes energizing. Because growth is no longer a burden imposed from outside. It is a project you chose. And that choice, sustained over years, becomes the quiet evidence of your transformation. Not that you are perfect, not that you are beyond error, but that you are no longer asleep inside your own life. You are awake to your motives, awake to your weaknesses, awake to your potential, and from that awareness, you continue building, not toward moral perfection, but toward integrated strength. In that steady, disciplined construction of self, the old opposites lose their grip. You are not trying to be good. You are not afraid of being labeled evil. You are committed to becoming deliberate. And that commitment, renewed daily, is the living expression of everything this journey was meant to awaken.